So LimaCharlie 101, for the next 40 minutes or so, 35 minutes, we're gonna spend some time talking about like the basics of the platform. I'm gonna use this time to also outline some stuff that maybe you've forgotten, maybe you're not familiar with, or just some things that you just have now put into the back of automation and you've completely forgot that was actually a concept or something that we did. Right off the bat, I usually like to remind everyone, if you're in a managed services role or something like that, remember that upfront, LimaCharlie is API first. So anything I'm about to talk to you about for the next 6 hours is scriptable, completely scriptable. Can be written in any form that you want. I like to quote a case study of two very good friends of mine in the back, where they got it automated to a point that someone who was not technical at all was able to completely spin up a brand new organization or a brand new tenant if need be. Like, that's the level of automation that we want you to be thinking about and working towards. How easy can I make this for people on my team? I'll be honest with you, it's usually the question that we try to answer a lot of times when we're assessing a lot of parts of the platform and new features we're rolling out. How easy can we make this for people who are going to be using this later on down the line? And what I mean by that is not necessarily like LimaCharlie's full of a bunch of easy buttons, but is the ability to build a process, is the ability to build a workflow that makes things really easy doable? Are all the different pieces there? Is the path to get there actually in place? And that's going to kind of be something that's going to sit with us as we work through this. So right up front, multi-tenancy and API first is something to keep in mind. There's an important reason why some of these key concepts are in here. I know most of you have heard me use this comparison before, and just in case you haven't heard this before, we like to think of ourselves as a cloud platform very similar to the way that you would AWS. That is not what I wanted right there. We're going to go here instead. All right. I like to kind of hone in on some of the different products that are listed here from an AWS perspective, and just remind everyone that this is similar to the approach that we want you to think about when you're building out security operations. I know in a lot of cases, there's a lot of the industry which has tried to design itself to be very easy. Like, oh, just install these two things, click a button, and boom, you're done. Unfortunately, I think a lot of you have started to realize and figure out that's not really, that doesn't work. If it worked, we wouldn't keep setting trends and high-level statistics and breaking records from an adversarial perspective every single year. I'm kind of really plain in my assumption of cybersecurity, which is like, if all of that easy button crap worked, then why do I have ransomware attackers setting records in ransomware payments? Why do I have adversaries setting records in time to get domain administrator? Why do I have adversaries setting records in pretty much any metric that can be counted? They're getting faster, they're getting smarter, and they're getting richer, which means we're either getting the opposite of all of those things, which I don't really like, or it means we need to try a different approach that works. And I think everybody slapping AI on the end of what they do is not necessarily the thing that we want. But nonetheless, I like to hone in on this because this is a very, very similar mental approach when you open up AWS, which is like, what is it you're trying to build or what is it you're trying to do? We just take the magnifying glass and put it on security operations. That's it. We make it super simple to say, if I wanted to build out security operations, here's all the things that I would do. But AWS is built to be in this sort of like bits and pieces that I'm going to assemble together as I need them, right? Not every single thing that you build in the world is going to require EC2, a VM. Not everything in the world that you build is going to require a NoSQL database, but the option's there if you need it, number one. And number two, if you need it later on in life, it should be much easier to simply add on and say, okay, I'm going to require this thing. I didn't need it 6 months ago. I do need it now. I want to add this to my stack. Done. It's just completely integrated and it's there and it works and it's often easy to bring together. The flip side of all of this is when I acquire and use these things, I don't want to have to get into a contract negotiation. I don't want to have to discuss long-term pricing. I don't want to have to get into some sort of commitment, which is the other thing that happens a lot in security right now is, oh, you want to buy my thing or you want to be a partner for a thing? Cool, let's talk in terms of 1, 2, 3 years. We're going to spend 6 months going back and forth on contracts, on red tape, on legal negotiations, and so on and so forth, until finally I get to deploy and do a thing. The third high-level takeaway here is no matter how vast this catalog gets, I just kind of scroll, okay, good, we're in more real time now. No matter how vast this catalog gets, this is cool. Did you all know that AWS has a satellite option? AWS ground station? No matter how vast this catalog gets, if I want one of these things, I spin it up and we go. There we go. I spin it up and we go. It's fast, meaning it's on demand, it's right there. I pay for it the moment I start using it, and I stop paying for it the moment I stop using it. All of those things should be kind of basic table stakes for building any sort of product or any sort of service or any sort of thing these days. And that's a good starting point for us. A good starting point is to think of all those different high-level concepts and then just apply that to security operations. I want to build a thing, or I want to be a thing, an enterprise SOC, an MSSP, an MDR, an IR consultant firm. I want to build a brand new security thing that no one's ever seen before. I want to ingest telemetry that no one's ever had to deal with before. I want to corner a piece of the market that no one else is touching. Like, all of those things are ideas that you would open up AWS or Google Cloud or Azure with. You do the same thing with us. I want to do XYZ thing. Whether it's a dream that's been realized before or not, we give you the pieces to get there. So that's my really quick high-level speech, right, of what LimaCharlie is designed to be. With that in mind, there's a lot of other kind of key basics that we need to understand about how the platform works. And I'm just going to talk about a few of those. I know, again, a lot of you have familiarity with a lot of this. So if I misspeak, call me out, number one. Number two, if there's something you want to drill into further, we'll probably do that in a subsequent session. But the first key element, very, very similar to any cloud provider. This is funny. Those of you who have seen me walk through this before, you're probably expecting me to start talking about telemetry. Not the case. I'm actually going to go here, believe it or not. The first key element, which is the very first thing that we deal with in any sort of cloud provider, are permissions, access controls, the ability to limit who can access what, who can do what, who can control things, who can move things around. That is one of the other kind of key parts of LimaCharlie. Hopefully everyone can see this. If not, squint. No, I'm kidding. I'll zoom in a little bit for you. With that said, we have built in some really, really crazy access control capabilities. Everything that you can do inside of the platform is split between getting, setting, deleting, managing, so on and so forth. This is like my first love of having the platform in place, because I can control who does what inside of the organization, which is exactly the same way any security organization is hierarchy. So I've got my upper level managers and my executives. If any of you are in this room, I apologize. I don't want you messing with stuff. So I'm going to take away that permission. If any of you are at that low-level intern, I want you messing with stuff, but after a triple review. So I'm going to maybe limit what you can do, but I'm going to make sure that there's processes in place. For my analysts, my senior analysts, my management, I want you to have full control over things. And we've got really, really granular ACLs in place that make it really easy. And I'm just scrolling through the list here to just show you how vast this is, that make it really easy to limit or extend permissions as need be. Again, if I were to go to any cloud provider, this is the first thing that I would set up. Who can do what do I want to limit down? So I like keeping this in mind. For those of you who are familiar with the platform, and let's see if the microphone works if I put it up there. For those of you who are familiar with the platform, this is another thing to keep in mind that can be done as well. Does this move? Oh, actually, it's supposed to stay there. Oops. Sorry, AV guys, I moved the microphone. I'm going to move it here, though, so I can actually speak into it and use it. There we go. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is you've got the ability to limit and control. We've got kind of privileged permissions in here as well that associate with API keys, billing, user commands, so on and so forth. And recently introduced, I say recently because between Mission Control last year and now, is the ability to manage groups. Funny enough, I've been on some pretty awesome conversations lately. I'm saying awesome a little bit tongue-in-cheek here, but folks are asking for some really, really detailed sub-level and triple-level permission capabilities as well. So anyone who's in an MDR or an MSSP and you want to extend access to the platform to your customers, we've also dealt with folks who are MSSPs for MSSPs. They subsequently want to go 3 layers down. Grouping and whatnot makes it easy to actually start to conceptualize and put that together. It's obviously going to require a little bit more work because we're going to be building permissions out and figuring who has access to what. Excuse me. But you do have the option to, from a group level, come in and actually control who can do what and kind of how that works and whatnot, right? I am looking for this here. So I've got the ability to manage high-level groups, access controls. All of this can be set by organizations. I can create as many as I need to. We've also got the ability to get activity logs out of them as well. And I just like to issue that as a reminder for everyone here. Don't just get in and add all your friends or add all your coworkers into LimaCharlie and everyone's got full access to just start blowing through things. Instead, take some time to say, what should these people have access to and how do I want to limit that? And then structure the platform accordingly. Now, Really cool. One thing about us, I'm not going to force this error right here, right now, but I will just say that if you require or if you need to be able to do something and you don't have access to do it, platform comes back and very happily says you don't have access to this particular control, this particular ACL. So go ahead and request access to it, and then hopefully, if you're able to do it, you're able to do it. Where this becomes really useful, let me pick on one in particular. I'm going to scroll down here. Where this becomes really useful is down in things when I get into like advanced detection engineering concepts. So YARA rules, for example. We'll talk about YARAs in the next hour. But where YARA rules come in is from a malware detection perspective, from a malicious file perspective. But what I want to do with YARA rules can depend a lot on my role within an organization. So I like to use this as a quick starter to say, do I want the same people, if my team is big enough, do I want the same people writing rules, deleting rules, and then running for rules or running those types of tasks? If I have a smaller team, absolutely. But if I've got a bigger team, I have an actual detection engineering team, folks whose only job is to be out there writing detections, testing efficacy, and then kind of releasing them out to the SOC, that's going to create a natural division in responsibilities. I'm going to want to have my ACLs mirror that. I'm going to want to say, you're on the detection engineering team. You're not in here analyzing alerts. So I don't need to give you access to all that, but I do need you to have the permission to set and create rules. Flip side is, you're an analyst. I don't want you to have a great, crazy idea from some blog post you just read over the weekend and then come in here and change all of our rules around. I'm going to limit and restrict that down. So as you're going through and utilizing the platform, definitely keep these ACLs in mind. And as you utilize it with more of your team, keep that in mind as well. Underneath the organizations, we also have the API functionality. I kind of like breeze over this, not because it's not important, but because it's just a way to do everything via the API. But generating keys, having different types of associations with them. Again, if I create an API key, I have the ability to limit its ACLs, what it can and can't do, and I can use that from like an application perspective if need be. I'm going to drop one little quick note for everyone in here. We're going to run into these a lot. So one of the things that has definitely changed over the recent history of LimaCharlie, especially since last year, it's funny enough, I think at his talk last year, Max, who's in the back there, I think in his talk last year, Max actually previewed what was one of the very first new extensions inside of LimaCharlie. And in this year, we've rewritten most of the platform, if not all of the platform and all of the extensions, to actually be in kind of this new style framework. For those of you that have been with us for a while, these used to be services. They're now called extensions. They're much more capable. They're much more observable. There's much more options. It's easier for us to build, templatize, so on and so forth. But it does mean there's a lot more kind of things popping up around the environment that are associated with your extensions. These aren't bad. I actually like it because it shows me what the different extensions have the ability and the capability to do and what they need the ACLs to be able to do. So I like when I get these add-on features or these different bolt-ons, and they themselves are limited in their extensions. To the best of my knowledge, and no, I'm not going to ask anybody to correct me because I hope I'm right on this, but to the best of my knowledge, we're not asking you to enable an extension or to turn on some sort of add-on that's like, hey, give me domain admin so I can function properly, please, right? Everything is least permissions, the minimum of what it needs and only what it needs to get added on. Obviously, this creates a really good security bolster, I think, for those of you that have to deal with regulatory bodies or might have to answer questions to your customers in the future. Hey, what are all these different API keys I see in here? Are these all users? Are these all services? What is it? They're built-in parts of LimaCharlie that have least privilege access. They are strictly there just to provide us additional functionality. Didn't think we could spend 15 minutes on ACLs, did you? But we can. It's an important thing to note, an important thing to keep in mind as you go through and build out more of the platform. But with that said, that's ACLs covered in kind of, again, like a nutshell. If you want to dig any deeper into any of these, I'm going to obviously say go check out the documentation, but that's a really rude way of being like, that's kind of where we're going to stop right here. But there is more to dig into if you need to, or if that's something you're worried about. I will note as well, multi-factor authentication is part of the authentication routine now. That's there, it's got to be enabled, and I love having it. And I'm saying it's got to be enabled both from a personal preference point of view and from a platform point of view. Please utilize this thing. If you're single factor authoring anything in this world, can you and I go and sit outside at lunch and talk about some other things that you're going to be dealing with? All right, so now continuing to go down the road of we're not talking about data yet, we're talking about the platform. The next kind of topic that I've got in mind for us here is this like star as code topic. And I feel like this is something that a lot of people just say and they bring up as like a feature, and it's like 10 bullet points down. I'm actually going to use it as like bullet point number 2 in this hour. And this is this as code approach, okay? Now, there's a big difference in this. First, I know we're going to spend a lot of time today inside of our UI. And that's just because it's the easiest way for me to just paint a picture for you to see. However, as I mentioned from an API perspective, you've got the ability to do almost anything on the platform from an API. You've also got the ability to manage N number of tenants or N number of instances from a YAML or from a code perspective. Every single organization, every single tenant, the words are synonymous, every single one has a Yara representation of what is going on inside of that organization. This is probably going to be somewhere in the vicinity of hundreds of tens of thousands of lines, if not 95,628 lines. This YAML file right here, folks, this is my entire organization right here. All of my DNR rules, all of my installation keys, which we'll talk about next, all of my secrets, I like having those in there as well, my detection and response rules, as I said just a moment ago, all the configurations, the different permissions, all the stuff that's been built out is going to be here inside of this particular YAML file. What I like about this is not the fact that you have a chance to read 96,000 lines of YAML, but the fact that I can manage and change this configuration as I need to from right here inside of the UI or from the command line if need be as well. Scalability is the biggest issue that you're going to face with, I'm going to say, any platform that's out there. Oh, you say you're multi-tenant. Cool. What does that process look like? Oh, you say you can support multiple environments. What does that process look like? I hate to say it. Let's just look at kind of the bad of the bad, and then we'll work our way up to maybe a better approach. Bad of the bad, someone's Siri just spoke up. I don't know who that was, but that's okay. Anything interesting? Okay, all right. As long as it wasn't an Amber Alert, we'll be okay. But nonetheless, you know, when I think about scalability in platforms, a lot of platforms, they want you to get into a UI, and you're going to be spending this entire process here, going through the UI, setting things up, drop downing. Maybe you can templatize a little bit, but you're spending a lot of time in a browser window to try and set additional tenants up, to try and set up additional organizations. That doesn't scale well, because now I need a human who's really good at hopping through browser windows. 2, maybe they give me an API option to do it, but they limit the functionality. Again, doesn't scale well, because I need to be able to replicate one for one. 3 is speed. I'm a former incident responder, so a lot of times when I talk about security platforms and security tooling, there's an overhanging time precipice on my head. I want everything done as soon as I possibly can, because my world, a lot of my training was yesterday. This should have been done yesterday, not because you knew it needed to be done, but because we're already late. So whenever I think about scalability, the first thing that comes to mind is time. Oh, you're multi-tenant? That's cool. If it takes me 8 hours to set up a new tenant, you're not multi-tenant efficient. You're multi-tenant supporting, you're not efficient. It shouldn't take me that long to get it spun up. As an incident responder, I worked with a few places where to get a tech stack spun up to respond to an incident, it took 8 to 10 hours to spin up that infrastructure. Anyone here ever done incident response or ever like read a threat report? Do you know how much an attacker can do with 10 hours of extra time? Like, you almost get to the point of breaking a contract by being like, yeah, it'll take us half a day to get there. And it's like, if you're flying, that's okay. But if you're just giving the adversary additional time because you can't code fast enough, there's an issue in that one there. That's another thing that we wanted to try and solve. And that's what this as code approach does. Worst of the worst will be multi-tenant. And the way that they do that is they throw everyone's data into a common place. And there's all sorts of tagging, maybe a little bit of siloing that occurs, but it's, you know, not really multi-tenant. It's just, to you, the user, multi-tenant. The next one might be actual logical silos between them. Maybe you have a database with different tables in it. But again, we're still looking at a common data set there. Here's where this becomes tricky. If anyone's ever read about any of those breaches that involve like law firms or VC firms and stuff like that, where it's kind of like they got access to everything, you should be asking the question, did they get access to the file server as a user, or did they get access to the organization as an admin? Because if you got access as a user and that gave you access to everything, there's a big segmentation issue. inside of that organization. That's another thing that we wanted to solve, was that whole idea of, if I have a bunch of analysts on my team, can I limit and restrict what they can do? Yes. Can I deploy quickly those restrictions? Can I deploy quickly those configurations? Yes, and that's where our infrastructure as code capability comes in. I know some of you are using this, and it's one of my favorite features. I talked about an organization being an entire YAML file. We've got a framework in place that allows you to manage n number of organizations from a code perspective. Now, in this today training session, we're not going to spin up multiple organizations just so we can see the YAML file in place, but essentially, it's giving you the ability to scale quickly. And that, again, should be another kind of table stake feature of, I'm doing cybersecurity work. Time is usually not on my side for a lot of things, so I need stuff to be rapid. If any of you do IR, and we've got a lot of folks who utilize LimaCharlie from an incident response perspective, I can get you up and running in about a minute. From I don't have anything to now I have an agent I can deploy. That is unheard of breakneck time. But it's all doable because on the back end, we just make it super easy to be able to have all these configurations in place. And if any of you are like watching, I'm realizing all of my installation keys or whatnot are getting broadcast on screen. So I'm gonna have to go change all these at the end of training now, or else you're gonna tap into my test O365 instance. When it comes to protecting data and keeping things secret, why is this not? Oh, there we go, okay. When it comes to, is that just me? Anyone else seeing that? UI bug. Nonetheless, every single time you've got data that you need to store, when it comes to accessing additional third-party data sets, if it comes to just wanting to store secrets and passwords inside of the platform, on the same topic of ACLs, on the same topic of keeping your data safe and whatnot, you've also got the ability to store things inside of our secrets manager as well. And this gives you the option to say, I don't want to like have all my API keys out in plain text. I don't want to have all of these different things out there and available for everyone to read. Not only can I limit via ACLs, I can also limit what people see by dropping my secrets in here if I want to. And that's another way to just kind of protect the data that you're going to keep inside of LimaCharlie and keep it separate if need be. One of my other favorite parts about this is the ability to drop tags and comments in here. So this is where we extend a little bit beyond just a single user. And if I've got secrets and I've got folks who have access to them, I want to give them an insight as to what's happening on. So this is a 365-day secret for O365 and whatever Microsoft's calling it today, access or something. And that helps me keep accountability and keep track of what's happening inside of the platform. These are like sub-little features that kind of maybe feel like, well, yeah, of course I'm going to utilize all those things, but they're really, really useful to have and to keep in mind as you're going through and thinking about building out. Because again, would any of you want to commit your API keys to a public repo? No, absolutely not. Would you want to have your API keys in front of an employee or in front of an analyst who isn't supposed to see them? No. Not that there's anything wrong, inherently bad there, but if I've got a way to protect them, let me protect them. So that's where our secrets manager comes in. And last but not least, the billing capabilities. Yeah, this is what you're using. This is a granular, detailed breakdown. I promise you all right here, the billing representation inside of LimaCharlie is designed to mirror exactly the way I would see like a cost estimator in AWS or Azure. What are you spending? Where is it coming from? How much is it being charged? What does your total look like? And how much, like you can predict, you can forecast ahead of time. Pricing is not only transparent at the beginning, it's also transparent during the time. Really, really useful for you to be like, I know exactly what this is going to cost me. For those of you in long-term deployments, that's essentially very, very important because you're managing contracts months out, years out. For those of you who are building stuff, you want to do it cost effectively. For those of you who are doing things like incident response, maybe more short-term engagements and whatnot, I want to know right on the spot how much does my team actually run up from a charge perspective. I like to keep these features kind of front of mind. So you didn't think we'd be starting out a 101 by looking at ACLs, billing, access controls, and then some of the organizational settings. But the reason I started here is because I view this to be some of the most foundational pieces to anything that you're going to build out. So let's talk about building a security stack out really quick. Do we just load a bunch of tools in and then connect all the pieces and then say, all right, everyone, all this stuff's in there. Now let's figure out who's able to do what. I would argue and say that good planning would be, what is it that we're going to bring in? What is it that we're going to use it for? Who's going to be using it? Like, you properly assess it. You properly assess where that thing is going to fit within your stack and who needs to have access to it and what should be actually done. And you adjust accordingly. Oh, we gave access to 5 analysts. We should have given it to 10. Oops, we'll add those other 5 in. That was a quick like job discrepancy. But to just simply give everyone full admin rights and then say, okay, now let me go back and whittle down what they can and can't do. Well, just in case anyone's curious as to whether or not that strategy works, it's often tried with Windows operating systems, and it seldom works, where you just give everyone full access to everything and then boil it down or break it down afterwards thinking, oh, they won't really need access to this thing. So I'd argue and say good planning up ahead of time. The other side of it that makes it a lot easier, for any of you who are managing dozens or hundreds of organizations under LimaCharlie, I promise you, if you started syncing from an infrastructure as code perspective, if you started syncing your YAML files when you were at like 2 organizations, it's a lot easier than if you synced it when you're at like 100, because there's just so much data coming down. So this is another one of those things where it's like, does infrastructure as code, does detection as code, do those apply to small scale deployments and engagements? Absolutely. Because I want you to have that foundation in place that when you get to N+1, and I've talked to a few of you before and other folks who are LimaCharlie users as well, they've got big dreams. They're like, I'm about to sign my very first customer. And I'm like, cool, we'll still be here when you sign your 100th. But when you sign your 100th, I don't want you to then start looking for optimization and efficiency. If it's available in the very beginning, take advantage of it in the very beginning, because this doesn't change. N+1, N+100, this doesn't change. It stays in there and it lets it just make life a lot easier for you. And then I really like the idea, last but not least, of you being able to build processes around this as well. How do we start a new organization in LimaCharlie? There's a big difference between a company that has a diagram walkthrough of how to do it in the UI versus a company that says, whoever runs and starts that organization, here's a script, we're up and running, we're good to go, we're done. Not saying either one is the right way, there's multiple ways to get there, but just simply having those different options so that you can appeal to different skill levels, different capabilities, and then you can also scale out your onboarding process as well. That's what things like this are designed to be for, is to help you scale out things like that faster. So lots of really cool things to have in place. And again, I like to use them as little reminders. Even some of you who are like power users in the platform and have spent a lot of time seeing this might not have as much familiarity with those like little sub pieces that help keep the platform together and help keep it running. The last little piece I'm going to mention, because we are almost at the end of our very first session here, are logs. No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to talk about platform logs. That's boring. I'm going to get us started on what's going to be kind of our next segment there. One of the core pieces of LimaCharlie, once I've got all those other things in place, one of the core pieces is going to be telemetry. I know if you've heard me on a video before, you've heard me say the word telemetry. But telemetry, Nico's not listening, but if she was, I would say telemetry, team telemetry. But getting data into LimaCharlie is going to kind of be the fuel for the car. That's what's going to get things going and get things running, is getting data in. The next segment that we do is going to be working with different types of telemetry and getting them in, but telemetry is going to be your starting point. I'm not going to tell you the different things we support and the different data that's out there. I just want to talk about why this is so critical, meaning why you should be getting in as much telemetry as you possibly can from a security perspective. One, anyone here ever worked an incident or worked a breach before that involved more than one data set? Yeah, always. Right? There's always more than one data set involved. A typical security approach for a very long time, I know this because I lived it, has been, okay, we have our primary sources of evidence, EDR, and for a lot of places, Sysmon, Windows event logs. That's it. Like, that's our primary source. If those things trip, something bad has happened. That works, making the assumption that the adversary is always going to be tripping one of those alarms. But I got adversaries, folks, so I spent a lot of time during my career investigating business email compromise cases. I don't know if anyone here has ever had any experience with BEC cases, but I will tell you 99.9% of BEC cases never trip an EDR alert at all. They are adversaries who are, I hate calling them skilled, but unfortunately they are. They're very skilled at moving laterally between inboxes. That's it. They touch email inboxes. If you don't have detection mechanisms in place for O365 or M365, these guys will continue to steal the billions every year that they steal, plain and simple. So what you're telling me is this diametric shift in security, where EDR can no longer be my primary source of evidence. It's got to be a secondary in that case. M365, O365 logs, and I'm just picking on this one particular objective, this one particular threat group, has to be my primary source of evidence in that case. We've got some folks coming into this conference, and this is becoming a very big thing lately too, about identity access management logs. Push security. We've got some great friends over at Push. I'm picking on Push only because Adam Bateman's at the top of my mind right now. But they're doing identity detection and response. If anyone remembers the Caesars breach from last year, or some of the other breaches that have taken place, it's identity credentials that they're going after. Like, that's the way in. Imagine if the very first time you discovered an adversary was in the environment was, oh, they're harvesting credentials. And it's like, well, wait, how did they get here in the first place? Oh, that third-party log source that we don't really prioritize. And that was the security approach for a long time. Ooh, EDR tripped. Go see what the event logs show. Go see what the identity access logs show. Go see what everything else shows. Look at the web logs. There's the web shell that they dropped in and got in on. And it's like, why were we not looking there first? Like, why was that not a primary source? So then security shifted. And security was like, okay, well, if these other logs are important to the investigation, then let's just ingest everything. And that way we'll have it. So when the IR team shows up, kicking and screaming, we'll just say, here's the access to the SIM. Go look at all the things. The logs are in there. That was my job as an incident responder for a long time, was digging through other people's logs, looking for clear evidence of compromise that just was like a Christmas tree on a dark night. Then obviously the paradigm started to shift where it was like, wait a second, why don't we actually detect on these primary sources? So one of the reasons for bringing all your telemetry in is because you're going to need it. 1. 2, we want to operationalize it. This is kind of a segue into like what our next segment is going to be. We're going to break beforehand, don't worry. But our next segment's going to get into operationalizing and making use of that telemetry that's coming in via detection and response capabilities, getting alternate data sources in and things like that. Because this is the part where everyone has to be very, very selfish when it comes to security. Every single person's environment in here is different than the next company, the next person, the next analyst sitting next to you. Your environment's different. You've got data sources that no one else has. You've got needs, you've got requirements, you've got customers, you've got all sorts of things that no one else has. If I were to try and one size fits all you from here on out, from a platform perspective, then we'd all just be offering the same service, which wouldn't work out. So for anyone who's at or partnered with someone who's like an EDR first approach, that's a one size fits all. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's a one size fits all. Go deploy our thing. We'll tell you when all the bad stuff happens. Wash, rinse, and repeat for all of your customers. Well, I might have a customer that's a Mac heavy environment. I might have a customer that is almost completely servers. I might have a customer that's completely cloud. I might have a customer where most of their stuff's done in containers. I'm working with someone right now, and this is kind of like a telemetry case study. I'm working with a company right now, obviously within LimaCharlie. Their primary evidence sources are 1Password, GitHub logs, and CloudTrail, and GuardDuty, AWS. That's it. Those are the 3 things that constitute the majority of their environment. Without those 3 things, there's not really much going on. A couple of terminals, a couple of people have some laptops and stuff like that, but most of their operations are done across those 3 platforms. So their ability to say, we're not like others, we've got to operationalize and work with telemetry that is kind of non-normal for the industry, could be one of 2 things. They could either go buy a product for every single one. Okay, here's my AWS monitoring product, here's my identity management product, and then over here is my source code management product, and do all of those things. The thing is, they're not trying to manage source code, so they don't fit in that bucket. They have more than AWS, so they don't just fit in that bucket. They need something that kind of traverses all those. So we're going to break now from our first session, but that's kind of a little bit of an introduction to the next one, which is going to be working with different types of telemetry, getting different data types and whatnot into LimaCharlie. All right, but yeah, all right, first one done.